You can't always explain why some relationships drain you while others wake something up in you, something calm, alert, and unafraid. But part of you knows the difference between being pursued and being truly seen. What if the way a man treats you isn't just about who he is, but about how deeply he's willing to confront himself in your presence? Is he connecting with you or with the version of you that keeps his ego safe? Let's look at the 6 ways a man behaves when you're not just someone he wants, but someone who mirrors his unconscious. In the early stages of many relationships, people unconsciously present a version of themselves they believe will be accepted, admired, or loved. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to survive, fit in, or gain approval. You've likely encountered this before without realizing it. A man who seems confident, charming, funny, almost effortlessly so. He says all the right things. He seems emotionally fluent. But something doesn't quite land. You feel like you're relating to a version of him that's been practiced, not lived. And you might not question it at first, because the persona can be intoxicating. It's polished, familiar, predictable. It offers a sense of safety until you realize it's also a barrier. When a man sees you as someone significant, the one in the language of our topic today, he begins to lower that mask. Not because he's trying to impress you more, but because the unconscious need to perform starts to dissolve. At first, this can be confusing. He may seem less articulate than before, less put together, maybe even more anxious or more quiet. It might look like he's pulling away, but it's actually the opposite. You are no longer interacting with his constructed self. You're meeting the real person underneath. This transition is not always graceful. He may not know how to be without the persona. For years, maybe decades, he's learned that being seen means being judged. That connection requires a role, the successful one, the funny one, the strong one. So now, in the presence of real emotional potential, he's shedding a skin he's worn for survival. And you'll notice it in small moments, when he hesitates instead of charming you, when he admits uncertainty rather than making bold claims, when he lets silence stretch instead of filling the space with stories. These are not signs of weakness, they're signs of psychological intimacy. In Jungian terms, this is where the ego begins to relax, and the real self, what Jung called the self, the deeper center of the psyche, has a chance to emerge. But here's the challenge. Many people panic when the persona drops. You might feel disappointed. You might wonder where that exciting, expressive man went. The truth is, he was never fully there. What you were connecting with was a curated image. Now you're meeting the person. So the question becomes, can you sit with the real? Can you receive the unfinished, uncertain, and unpolished parts of another person without needing them to go back to performing? Because love that reaches the unconscious doesn't thrive on performance. It grows in presence. And when you stop performing too, that's when something real can begin. In most relationships, there comes a point where emotional discomfort surfaces, vulnerability, misunderstanding, fear of abandonment, or just the awkwardness of being truly seen. How someone responds in those moments tells you far more than how they behave when everything is going well. When a man is still operating from emotional survival patterns, he may unconsciously avoid these moments. He changes the subject, jokes, gets defensive, or disappears for a while. These aren't signs of cruelty, they're learned defenses. Emotional discomfort threatens the fragile construction of the ego. But if you're someone who touches something deeper in him, something shifts. He might still feel discomfort, but he doesn't run. He stays. He listens, even if clumsily. He might not have the perfect words, but his nervous system doesn't shut down the conversation. He shows up not with solutions, but with presence. That's a sign that his shadow is coming to the surface, not being projected outward, but integrated. Jung taught that the shadow is made up of everything we repress or deny in ourselves, our weakness, fear, jealousy, helplessness. When a man begins to tolerate those parts of himself in front of someone else, it's not just emotional maturity, it's the start of transformation. You may notice that he looks uncomfortable, like he's fighting with himself, because he is. A part of him wants to default to silence or escape, but another part wants to grow. And when you're the one, that second part gets louder. He realizes you're not just someone to feel good around, you're someone around whom he wants to be real. This doesn't mean he'll never mess up. He will. Everyone does. But the difference is, he circles back. He reflects. He admits when he pulls away. And he tries again, without trying to erase the difficulty. So the question becomes, can you recognize the difference between emotional suppression and emotional growth? And more personally, can you hold space for someone else's discomfort without rushing to fix it or interpreting it as rejection? Because the ability to tolerate emotional pain without running, blaming, or numbing is one of the clearest signs that love is becoming conscious. Most people ask questions to gather reassurance, to make sure they're still desirable, still in control, still safe. The questions sound curious, but they're often leading. They're designed to confirm a preferred image. Do you think I'm a good man? You had a good time with me, right? You're not like those other people, are you? When a man sees you as emotionally significant, something deeper happens. He starts asking questions that don't protect his ego, but risk exposing it. Questions like, what made you pull one back just now? Or, what am I not seeing about how I show up in conflict? These questions are not strategic. They're not trying to impress. They come from a place of real curiosity, the kind that wants truth more than validation. You might be caught off guard. It may feel unfamiliar, because this kind of inquiry means he's willing to see you, even if it changes how he sees himself. In Jungian terms, this is the ego decentering itself. He's no longer the protagonist of the story, ich with you, as the supporting character. He's entering a more mutual, reflective space. He is willing to be influenced by who you are, not just to consume or shape you into what he needs. This can feel disorienting at first. You may have never had someone ask questions that weren't tied to performance or outcome. But this is one of the most grounded signs that something psychologically mature is unfolding. And he may ask these questions clumsily. He might not always handle your answers well. But the fact that he's even opening that door, voluntarily, is meaningful. Because a man who only wants to be admired won't ask questions that threaten his image. So here's the reflection. When was the last time someone asked you a question that wasn't about them, but about understanding you, with no strings attached? And maybe even more, importantly, how often do you ask yourself those kinds of questions? Every person has emotional patterns, ways of reacting to fear, intimacy, or uncertainty that developed long before adulthood. These patterns aren't random. They're tied to what Jung called complexes, unconscious emotional clusters shaped by early experiences. For example, a man who grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent might carry a deep, unconscious belief that closeness leads to disappointment. So when someone gets too close, he withdraws. Not because he doesn't care, but because the old emotional script is playing silently in the background. When you're just a temporary presence in someone's life, these complexes tend to stay intact. The person repeats the pattern. The withdrawal happens. The coldness returns. The cycle continues. But when a man sees you as emotionally significant, someone who touches the core of his psyche, he starts to interrupt the script. The usual reaction starts to rise. And then something else enters. Awareness. He pauses before shutting down. He names what he's feeling instead of acting it out. He takes responsibility, even when it would be easier to blame. He does something small but different, something that quietly says, I don't want to hurt you the way I've been hurt. This isn't always dramatic. In fact, you might miss it if you're looking for grand gestures, but it's psychologically profound, because the complex no longer rules him. The unconscious is becoming conscious. It might look like this. He used to go silent for days after a disagreement. Now he texts to say, I need space, but I don't want to disappear. Or maybe he used to make sarcastic jokes when feeling insecure. Now he says, that made me feel small. I didn't expect that. These shifts are small revolutions. Jung believed that true change doesn't come from willpower. It comes from becoming conscious of the pattern and choosing differently. In once. Every time a man breaks his own pattern, he's not just growing, he's becoming more integrated. So ask yourself, have you noticed someone change their behavior, not to please you, but because they no longer want to live inside a pattern that hurts both of you? And on the other side, which of your patterns are still playing out without your consent? Many men are taught, explicitly or implicitly, that they are only valuable when they're useful, capable, or strong. That if they don't have the answer, fix the problem, or hold it all together, they are failing. So what happens when a man begins to care deeply for someone? Often his instinct is to protect, to offer solutions, provide stability, or manage situations. And while that instinct can be genuine, it can also be a defense against something far more vulnerable, his powerlessness. But when you're the one, not just someone to care for, but someone who sees him, he may begin to let go of that role. Slowly, tentatively, he allows you to witness the truth he spent years avoiding. He doesn't have control. He can't prevent your pain. He can't guarantee your safety. He can't always regulate his own emotional storms. And when he allows you to see this, not as a confession of failure, but as a gesture of honesty, that's something rare. It's not weakness. It's a kind of strength that doesn't come from dominance or certainty. It comes from humility. Jung believed that real transformation begins when the ego confronts its limits, when we admit we are not all-powerful, all-knowing, or in control. This confrontation often leads to a deeper connection with the self, that center of being that doesn't rely on performance. You might hear it in his voice when he says, I don't know how to fix this, but I don't want to avoid it. Or, I feel scared too, and I don't want that to make me shut down. These are not admissions of failure. They're evidence that the persona is dissolving, and something deeper is emerging. And this is where love deepens. Because when someone stops trying to control the outcome, they begin to relate to you as you are, not as a problem to manage or a feeling to contain, but as a person in shared uncertainty. So ask yourself, have you ever felt the safety of someone saying, I don't know, not out of resignation, but out of truth? And equally, can you allow someone to be powerless in front of you without rushing in to fix it? Let's keep moving forward. The signs get even more nuanced from here. One of the clearest signs of emotional growth in a relationship is this, the moment between a trigger and a response. In most people, especially in emotionally close relationships, that moment doesn't last long. Something is said, a wound is touched, and the body reacts before the mind even catches up. Maybe it's defensiveness, maybe sarcasm, withdrawal, accusation. The cycle repeats. But when you're someone who matters deeply to him, someone who evokes not just his desire, but his self-awareness, he begins to slow down that cycle. You might notice it in small ways. You say something that would have once pushed him away, and instead, he goes quiet. Not in the shutting down way, but in the considering way. You see him, thinking, regulating. You see him trying to choose something different. That pause, That moment of tension where the old reaction is right there and he doesn't grab it, that's transformation. Jung believed that we are often ruled by what he called repetition compulsion. We unconsciously recreate emotional dynamics from our past in an attempt to resolve them. The psyche repeats what it can't yet understand. So if a man grew up never being listened to, he might react explosively when he feels misunderstood. Not because of what was said, but because the wound is old. The difference now is that with you, someone he sees as emotionally significant, he wants to be conscious. He doesn't want to keep repeating what hurt him or what hurt others, so he reflects. He steps back internally, and he asks, what's really happening here? This doesn't mean he becomes emotionless, quite the opposite. It means he's choosing responsibility over reaction. He's willing to feel without needing to project. You might feel safer around him, not because he never gets upset, but because his upset doesn't control the room. And that allows you to be more real, too. So, ask yourself, have you ever felt someone choose to stay connected instead of being right? And more personally, what do you do in the space between the trigger and your reaction? Early in relationships, especially romantic ones, it's common for men to adopt a kind of unspoken role, the protector, the provider, the fixer. There's often a quiet pressure to get it right, to be strong, to hold the emotional weight. At first, this might feel reassuring. He's reliable. He has things handled. But over time, you may notice that it leaves little space for you, your complexity, your ambiguity, your own strength. That's not intimacy. That's a performance. When a man sees you not as a project to fix or a role to fulfill, but as a person to meet, something shifts. He stops trying to be the hero. He stops needing to hold the relationship together. He steps out of the center of the narrative. This doesn't mean he becomes passive or disengaged. It means he starts to share the emotional landscape. He no longer needs to be the one with the answer. He becomes available to not know and to let you shape the relationship alongside him. Jung described the ego as the center of consciousness, but not the center of the whole psyche. The ego believes it's the main character, but in truth, it's just one part. When a man begins to decenter his ego, he becomes capable of true relationship, not dominance, not control, not caretaking, but connection. You'll feel the difference when he asks questions without steering the outcome, when he listens without planning a solution, when he says, "I hadn't considered that," and really means it. There's no rush, no power play, just two people sitting in the middle of something unknown and making space for each other's reality. So ask yourself, has someone ever stepped out of the spotlight so the relationship could breathe? And more intimately, where in your own life are you still trying to be the hero, when what's really needed is presence? We're approaching the deeper layers now. Let's keep going. Most people are comfortable talking about their goals, what they want to achieve, where they see themselves in 5 years, what they plan to build. But sharing dreams and fears is something else entirely. Because dreams aren't linear. They don't always make sense. They're often messy, strange, or deeply personal. And fears, well, they rarely flatter the ego. When a man begins to share his internal world with you, not just his plans, but his inner life, you're no longer relating to the persona. You're relating to the unconscious. He might tell you about a dream that unsettled him, about a recurring feeling of not being enough, about something irrational that he's never spoken aloud. These moments might seem small on the surface, but psychologically, they're a threshold. In Jungian psychology, dreams are a direct expression of the unconscious mind, symbols that reveal what the conscious self can't yet name. A man who shares these dreams with you is not just opening up, he's inviting you into the space where his deepest self is still forming. This kind of sharing is not about being dramatic or deep for the sake of connection. It's about truth. When someone feels safe enough to reveal what scares or confuses them, without needing to solve it or make it look strong, they are letting you see them. You might notice he stops speaking in clean, confident sentences. He might say things like, "This doesn't really make sense, but," or, "I've never told anyone this before, but." That's a sign that something real is happening. The ego is stepping aside, and the psyche is reaching out. These are the moments when love becomes more than emotion. It becomes a container for individuation, a space where someone can integrate who they are, who they've been, and who they're becoming. So ask yourself, have you ever created enough safety for someone to share their fears with, without editing them first? And in your own experience, what dreams or fears have you silenced even in relationships that felt close? Let's move forward. The next layer reveals what love looks like when it's not about control. One of the most difficult shifts in any intimate relationship is moving from possession to presence. In the early stages, many people unconsciously try to manage the other person, to make sure they don't leave, don't change, don't surprise us. It's not always obvious. It might look like concern or caretaking or passion, but underneath, it's often fear. When a man sees you as emotionally important, that fear can get triggered. But if he's evolving, if he's moving towards something more conscious, he will begin to notice the urge to control and choose not to act on it. That's what makes this stage different. He doesn't try to shape you anymore. He doesn't expect your emotions to fit his comfort zone. He starts to respect your separateness, your autonomy, your individuality, even when it challenges his own sense of security. Jung warned against the danger of psychological fusion when two people merge in a way that erases the boundary between them. It feels like love, but it's actually fear of aloneness. Real love, Jung wrote, requires separation with connection. You might notice that he lets you disagree without escalating, that he doesn't take your independence personally, that he listens to what you need, not to fix it, but to honor it. This doesn't mean detachment, it means differentiation. He is beginning to love you not because you complete him, but because he's learning to stay whole while still choosing you. It's a subtle shift, but a profound one. Instead of managing the relationship, he begins to relate. And that's when it becomes real. So ask yourself, have you mistaken someone's control for care? And more quietly, can you allow someone to remain separate from you even when you want that closeness? We've arrived at the final stage, the one that ties it all together, not with closure, but with inner integration. It's tempting to believe that when someone really loves you, they'll change for you, that they'll adapt their habits, rewrite their behaviors, soften their edges, all in service of keeping the relationship alive. But change that's rooted in pleasing another person rarely lasts. It's adaptation, not integration. It creates compliance, not transformation, and over time it leads to resentment, emotional fatigue, or collapse. When a man sees you as someone who touches his deeper psyche, not just his desire or his ego, something more enduring begins to happen. He doesn't shift who he is to keep you. He evolves into more of who he already is because the relationship acts like a mirror. You might not even notice it at first. He starts showing up differently, not just with you, but in his own life. He reflects more, he sets different boundaries, he becomes less reactive, more centered. These changes aren't for you, but they are shaped with you. In Jungian terms, this is the process of individuation, the psychological journey of becoming whole. It doesn't mean becoming perfect, it means becoming integrated. Shadow, ego, persona, wounds, instincts, all of it begins to align under conscious awareness. In a relationship that supports individuation, both people evolve alongside each other. Not in lockstep, not through negotiation, but through inner shifts that happen because the connection keeps revealing new layers of truth. This is what it means to be the one for someone. Not a fantasy they chase, not a project they fix, but a presence that calls them into more honesty, more integrity, and more inner alignment. You don't become their reason for growth. You become part of the context that makes growth inevitable. And that's where love stops being about possession, performance, or fear, and becomes a space where the psyche itself begins to heal. So ask yourself, are you evolving because you're afraid to lose someone? Or because being with them makes you unable to keep living the way you used to? And even more deeply, can you allow your relationship to be a place where both of you grow, even if that growth isn't always comfortable or easy or clear? This isn't the end. But if you've seen yourself in any of these moments, on either side of them, you've already started the work that matters most. Thank you for being here.